Welcome everyone to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and George Thomas successfully held off the Confederate attacks at Stones River, and now the Union Army would be pushing towards Chattanooga. After the Battle of Stones River, Rosecrans and Thomas spent the next 6 months preparing for the upcoming campaign. The Lincoln administration grew frustrated at the lack of movement, and because Thomas agreed with Rosecrans' decision to equip and train the army, he also got a reputation as being slow to action. During those 6 months, Thomas drilled and trained his troops thoroughly. He was a no-nonsense kind of person. One officer described Thomas and his headquarters as such. Thomas was an undesirable person to approach if you had nothing to say. His office was not a place for socializing, and if you had no point to make pertinent for his action, he would fix those cold gray eyes of his upon you, and with his immobile countenance, so embarrass and confuse you that you would wish yourself far away. The war was wearing on him. In his previous military career, he had his wife to keep him company, and he wrote to family in Southampton. However, now his wife was far away and his family wouldn't write him. Benjamin Scribner, who got moderately close to Thomas during the war, recalled a very telling moment. Once, Scribner told Thomas about a difficulty he was having, finishing with the exclamation, "Any man with a heart would feel as I do." Slowly shaking his head, Thomas replied, "I have educated myself not to feel." He uttered those words with lengthened pauses between each, Scribner remembered, as if every one of them recalled some bitter recollection. Scribner's family stayed in Murfreesboro during this time, and Thomas would accompany him to see his family many times. Scribner wrote that Thomas, having no children of his own, took much notice and seeming interest in mine, and would take them in his arms and caress them in a manner that won their mother's heart, and made her his friend for life. One day Thomas took Scribner's little boy on his knee and teased him about his curly hair, asking him, "What do you wear this for?" The boy replied by pulling on Thomas's shoulder straps, the insignia of his general's rank, and asking, "What do you wear this for?" The general, with a smile, replied that a child's question was more difficult to answer than his own. Many officers would put on amateur theatrical entertainments, and Thomas would attend regularly. He would nod approval at the efforts of the performers and beat time to the music, and when anything particularly comical took place, he would roll from side to side and nearly choke with merriment. A journalist remembered that Thomas always had the best food and drinks at his headquarters because of Thomas's fondness for food. Although not a heavy drinker, Thomas would sometimes drink socially. Rosecrans would begin his advance on June 24, 1863. He chose to outmaneuver Bragg, who had set up defenses at major gaps in the mountains southeast of Murfreesboro. He used Thomas's troops to attack the Confederates at Hoover's Gap, and through a series of flanking movements, forced Bragg to retreat. Over the course of 9 days, Rosecrans and Thomas drove back the rebel army 50 miles. Bragg would pull back to Chattanooga, and Rosecrans would occupy Tullahoma. Rosecrans waited for 6 weeks at Tullahoma, then pursued after the Confederates, who had concentrated near Chattanooga. The Union Army divided to make rapid movements and cut the Confederate Army off from the south, and it convinced Bragg to pull his army out of Chattanooga, handing it over to Union forces in early September. Thomas urged Rosecrans to concentrate his army, but Rosecrans perceived the Confederates as disorganized and demoralized. He wanted Thomas to march over Lookout Mountain. Part of Thomas's corps had made it over the mountain already. Negley's division marched through Stevens Gap and into McLemore's Cove, but had detected a significant Confederate force in their front. Thomas went to check in with Negley and agreed that he should not continue the advance against Rosecrans' wishes. On the night of September 11th, Negley's men fought a rear guard action, as all of the division made it to the safety of the mountains. By September 17th, the Union Army had safely moved through the mountains and concentrated along the Chickamauga Creek. Rosecrans was concerned about the Confederate Army cutting him off from Chattanooga, so he ordered Thomas to do a night march north to be the left of the Union line. On September 19th, repeated Confederate attacks against the Union line forced Thomas to commit many of his divisions to the north and south of his original line to defend against the rebels. By the time night rolled around, the Union Army resembled a question mark as a result of their attempts to hold on to as much of the Lafayette Road as possible. At 7:10 p.m., Rosecrans called a council of war. Thomas reported his actions during the day and then dozed off in his chair. Whenever Rosecrans asked him a direct question, he woke up, straightened up in his chair, and answered, I would strengthen the left, and then fell back asleep again. The meeting ended about 10 p.m., but Rosecrans kept some of his generals, including Thomas, around to socialize. The group would disperse around 2 a.m., and Thomas would distribute orders to his commanders and finally laid down on the ground to get a few hours' sleep. Thomas's men piled up logs and tree limbs to protect themselves from the enemy bullets that they knew would be flying at them the next day, and slept as much as they could. Before dawn, Thomas awoke and examined his lines with Rosecrans. Thomas asked Rosecrans for more troops to extend his line to the north, and Rosecrans assured him that Negley's division, which had been detached earlier, would rejoin Thomas. When it arrived around 8 a.m., he immediately sent Beatty's brigade to extend his line north. The front that Beatty occupied was far too large for one brigade to defend, and before Thomas could send aid to Beatty, the Confederate army attacked in precisely that sector, routing Beatty's men. However, when the Confederates angled southward to get in the rear of Thomas's line, Old Pap maneuvered his reserves to counter the advancing rebels and broke up their lines, forcing them back. Thomas remained at the front as the assaults against the main line continued. At one point, an artillery shell passed in between Thomas and one member of his staff as they were talking. They gave each other a smile and continued to talk. A few moments later, another shell passed in between them. Thomas said, "Major, I think we had better retire a little." They moved to a little grove of trees and continued their discussion. Thomas was continually concerned about his left flank to the north and assigned Negley's artillery to Snodgrass Hill to watch that side of the battlefield. Intent on finding the rest of his corps and assess the situation to the south where he was hearing heavy firing, Thomas rode south and found Union forces scrambling back from an apparent breakthrough in the Union line. Knowing that the rebels could roll up his entire line, he rode to Snodgrass Hill or Horseshoe Ridge to organize the retreating troops which were congregating there, along with artillery that he had placed there earlier. Troops on Snodgrass Hill were from different brigades, divisions, and corps, but Thomas was the unifying factor because all the men knew who he was and trusted his leadership. One soldier described the scene as Thomas sitting atop his horse, motionless, as sharpshooter bullets whizzed around him. His calmness in the chaos of battle inspired the men on Snodgrass Hill to do courageous acts. As one officer recalled, when it seemed we could not stand the shot and shell that were hurled at us in such showers and were about to give way, all the officers pitched in promiscuously to cheering and encouraging the men of all regiments alike. General Thomas would jump off his horse, swing his hat, rush among the men and encourage them by his own acts of valor. Another recalled, where the energy of the attack most endangered our line, he strengthened it with cannon and regiments drawn from points in less peril, and when the soldiers asked for more ammunition, Thomas said, "Use your bayonets." The Confederate sharpshooters were playing havoc on the Union officers, sending many of them ducking for cover. Thomas rode over to the 3rd Kentucky and asked if there were any good squirrel hunters among them. The regiment replied yes, and so Thomas ordered a detail of the best marksmen to go out in front and engage the Confederates. When one rebel sharpshooter was killed, the rest fled, and the detail rejoined the regiment on Snodgrass Hill. Thomas grew nervous when the Confederates renewed their attack and he saw dust flying up into the air to the north. That meant that a large body of men were moving, but were they Union or Confederate? Thomas pulled on his beard when he was nervous, and one gentleman recalled that his facial hair stuck out in every direction from so much pulling. However, when United States flags could be seen, he smoothed out his beard and placed those troops on Snodgrass Hill just in time to suppress another Confederate attack. He regained communication with Rosecrans, who sent him no help or ammunition, and by 5 p.m., Thomas needed to make a decision. Part of his command still held the position they occupied that morning on the original Union battle line, so Thomas rode off to see the situation for himself. On the way there, 2 soldiers looking for water came across his path and told Thomas that a large number of Confederates were to the north. Thomas organized his reserve division and ordered them to face north and move quickly in that direction. The attack surprised the Confederates and bought Thomas some more time. The decision was made to retreat, and as the sun began to set, the Union troops began leaving their breastworks and retreating under orders from Thomas. It was risky to leave before total darkness, but Thomas was afraid of waiting too long in case of a major attack against Snodgrass Hill. As they pulled away from their entrenchments, the Confederates rushed forward and took those positions, but luckily for Thomas, they didn't pursue further. Although there was at least one somewhat strong attack as they were falling back, Thomas's troops threw it back and continued retreating. Meeting Sheridan and his troops on the road to Rossville, they stopped at a town where Sheridan made them a seat from a fence rail. They sat down and Sheridan waited for Thomas to speak, but he just stared in silence. According to Sheridan, Thomas looked very much exhausted, seemed to forget what he had stopped for, and he said little or nothing of the incidents of the day. His quiet, unobtrusive demeanor communicating a gloomy rather than hopeful view of the situation. Defenses were set up at Rossville until the night of the 21st of September, when Rosecrans agreed for Thomas to retreat to Chattanooga. By the morning of the 22nd, the Army of the Cumberland were safely in the city. After Chickamauga, Rosecrans' star fell and Thomas's rose. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton wrote, "The merit of General Thomas and the debt of gratitude the nation owes to his valor and skill is fully appreciated here. It is not my fault that he was not in command months ago." President Lincoln wrote, "It is doubtful whether his heroism and skill exhibited last Sunday afternoon has ever been surpassed in this world."